So let's go ahead and get started. The minutes were sent out previously. Does anybody have any corrections to the minutes from the last meeting? Okay, if there's no comments, then we'll approve those minutes and we'll jump right into the meat of our work today. So at the last meeting, we were asked to send forward additional items, priority items, if I remember, to Lon. And then Lon was going to take those and put those together for us. And so he has done that and provided us with the second version of what our work plan is with the core values. I think, if I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we've worked through these core values already, right? It was really those priorities that we wanted to have some discussion on today.
Yeah, and I did make one edit, so that's why. Can you see my screen? Is that sharing for everybody?
Yep.
Okay. Steve Mosier had actually sent in some good comments about needing to add a couple of words to the kind of our purpose statement, that diversity and inclusion are two separate and distinct concepts, and it really should be called out on its own. So just those couple of words there in green were added. If anybody had any other edits on that, but otherwise, as you say, I wanted to focus more on the work plan portion of it at the end to make sure that I had kind of the priorities for first, second, and third priorities recorded correctly, because that's going to frame up what we do next.
I think it makes sense to add inclusion. That's a really great suggestion, Steve.
It was something I had seen and thinking about, and I just haven't spoken up about it. And we were talking about it quite a few times in our discussion about inclusion, and it makes sense to add it.
Well, the goal of embracing diversity is to lead to inclusion, so. Related but separate.
Okay, if I don't hear any additional comments on that, let's jump into some good hearty discussion regarding those priorities, which was the second page here. And thanks for having these available for us to work through, Lon. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So it looks like we've got first, second, third priorities: policy, practice, and perception. So let's just start a discussion about where we are with the first set of priorities under policy.
Okay. So with the first one, there were a couple of different pieces related to it. It seemed like with the first couple of meetings that we had, that police operations and understanding that and looking how the relationship of the police department to the community really were some of the things that everybody wanted to focus on. When we talked about whether we were going to work as a committee of the whole or split into subcommittees, it seemed like the overall sentiment was that we should work on those as a committee of the whole. So there's a couple of things here. One is that when I look at the city and when we make policy decisions, we don't have like an equity filter or an equity analysis piece yet when we're evaluating those and then making those recommendations to the city council. I have been doing some research on best practices available through the International City County Managers Association on how to implement those, and looking at communities that have been doing it for a while. So I have some ideas behind that. But to me, that's kind of where a lot of things start is, the city makes a lot of policies that affect all of our citizens. And this is not yet one of the evaluation criteria that we use when we're looking at those, to make sure that there's not some kind of a differential impact on any type of population. We have that in our capital improvements program. So the CIP for all of our community investments has that as part of its rubric, but it's not in there on city policies, whether it's internally facing policies or externally facing policies. So I think, to me, that's one that's, once we decide how we're going to do it, is a fairly easy win. And something that can be implemented fairly quickly.
Lon, do you see, once we figure out what that framework is, that, do you have an idea of how we will sort of chunk those policies out? I know there's dozens, maybe hundreds of policies. So is there a way that we prioritize certain policy reviews over others?
I can
Yeah.
say that regarding planning policies like zoning and land development, we do look for the equity impact on those. So it's inherent in the planning process. But maybe we're missing on the other policies, recruiting employees, staffing, those kind of things.
Mhm. I'm open to suggestions on how to prioritize what we would want to look at first. I mean, for me, I would start with the ones that I think probably have the most impact on the most people and then kind of work backwards from there. But I'm certainly open to discussion on it.
That sounds reasonable. I guess my only question is, how do you define equity when it was spoken that it's in part of some of your policies? But equity is a broad brush, and I didn't hear anything that was definitive on what equity is in the lens that you're viewing it as. If you can explain that a little further, I would greatly appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. Just trying to find the piece that I had. Okay. So what I'm looking at there, Steve, is to make sure that when the city is evaluating our policies, there's a couple of different things. One is, does it have any kind of disparate or differential impact towards any type of particular population? And if so, is it something that you're adopting deliberately because you're either trying to provide an advantage to that population, a program to that population? For example, if we're going to offer a program for seniors through the library, that's a very specific and targeted program with a very targeted audience. But when it comes to things like, okay, we're going to make a decision on, as a city, what type of music we're going to have at a certain festival. Do we do an equity analysis on that to make sure, is that music, does it appeal to one demographic and not to another? I mean, when you talk about being a welcoming community, that's one that always pops into my head from growing up on the western side of the state, that, you know, the county fairs and everything are heavily populated with country music. Not that there's something wrong with that, but I'm not a huge fan. And so it attracts certain populations and not others. And how do you make sure that you've got a well-rounded program so that everybody in the community who's contributing to the community and contributing the dollars that start those have the same attractions or the same opportunities to participate? Or what does the city have in its hiring policies to ensure that, you know, we're not targeting populations or providing a disadvantage to other populations? I can give you more examples, but that's really kind of what I'm looking at, is just ensuring that when the city does something, it's part of the analysis so that we make sure that we're not doing things that have unintended consequences.
For example, when we're setting parks and recreation fees for our programs, we'll look at those as well. What is the impact on the different population groups, income groups? And then I remember when we were working on housing, rental housing policy, we were trying to come up with a registration fee, and we looked at how would that be impacting the average renter and low income renter. So we were cognizant with the fact that how we regulate nuisance and how we permit and maintain rental housing operations, we are not negatively impacting the average renter, because we know that landlord by the end of the day can pass those costs to the renter.
So going back to what Steve was talking about, like with the idea of like, what does equity lens mean? I think that, you know, how I see it is, I would like to see a really clear definition of what that equity lens is. Lots of times I use, you know, that I look at things through a female lens when I'm developing programming, for example, and that has a certain set of criteria of like, what does it mean to be female responsive? So what does it mean to be equitable? And so just, I think when we're putting this together, thinking about how do we provide enough information so people clearly understand what it is and what we do and how it's applied and what's all included. And I also, I mean, I'm hearing like I love like thinking about like if we're having an event in Marion, what kind of event, and are we having a you know, if we're like the parks and recreation fees, I love that, you know, but I'm also thinking about like ordinances, and you know, I work in Cedar Rapids where the Safe CR has had a huge negative impact on the mental health population. And that wasn't originally what it was intended for, but it, you know, that has happened. And so how do we help make sure that those sorts of things don't happen in Marion?
Yeah. That's a good example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about, Jennifer, that, you know, if we're doing this right, we should hopefully anticipate that. Not that it's ever going to be perfect. There's the law of unintended consequences does seem to be real, but if it does happen, then what actions do you take to correct it, to make sure that, you know, it isn't something that we're not monitoring and don't think about for 5 years, and we have a negative impact on thousands of people during that 5 years.
Well, and just real quickly, I want to draw attention to a comment that Cersei had made in regards to the Government Alliance on Racial Equity having some of those frameworks built out as we're looking at policy decisions through that equity lens and thinking about how that, if we already have a relationship with gay or not, I'm not sure, but being able to utilize the frameworks that have been built for cities already.
Mhm.
Do we have a relationship with GARE or the Government Alliance for Racial Equity?
That's not a group that we've worked with, but we
Okay.
can certainly reach out.
I've been reviewing their site since it came up in the chat. It looks pretty robust.
Mhm.
But to what degree do you and are you able to satisfy everyone? Right? Just devil's advocate. I mean, and in that at some point you don't. How do you address that or prepare yourself to address it? I mean, is that speaking of policy, is there a boilerplate type? The last thing you want to do is have a boilerplate sort of response for that small group that doesn't feel that they were represented or that they were slighted. But you know, I'm not sure I've ever seen a community event or scenario where everyone is satisfied.
Very true.
No, and that's one of those things, Max, that for the city is sometimes the decision that you make, you know, going in is going to have a negative impact on one population or another. And the council talks about it all the time when we're talking about setting the budget for the next year, because if something has happened like a derecho and we have to look at, well, do we have to raise property taxes? Well, raising property taxes has disproportionate impacts on fixed income populations and low income populations. So, you know, there's no way to correct for that kind of thing with the legal environment that we have to work in. So there are some times where, you know, you still have to make the decision, but you know that it's going to unfortunately have a disparate impact. I think part of it is just making sure that that's at least part of the discussion, that, you know, you knowingly make the decision if as part of understanding all of the criteria, that it's not something that they're not being presented with.
Correct. Yeah, the key is to have it being part of the consideration.
I wish it was perfect. I wish we could make decisions that I could always guarantee did not have that consequence, but sometimes the constraints that we have to work in don't allow you to do that.
And we did learn that when we were talking about rates, water rates, and we learned by law, we cannot charge differential rates we were thinking about senior population and how that might be impacting them.
Mhm.
So we thought about other ways to mitigate that, creating other programs for assistance through some other entity to assist.
Amal, what are those other entities?
So we look always to partner who is nonprofit organizations. For example, we through the Civil Rights Commission, we thought about low-income housing assistance grant. We work with nonprofit to provide assistance to low-income populations in need. Because we don't have that direct service in our operation.
So it sounds like, if I'm following where the conversation is tracking, first we want to make sure that we have a common definition of equity and then start working from there. And I can certainly look at the Government Alliance on Racial Equity and see what resources they have. I'm absolutely not above shamelessly plagiarizing something that people have come up with that works. So
I think that's the work of the way of the work, right? There's no such thing as an original idea. It's been done somewhere, somehow, by someone, and they've figured out how to troubleshoot some of those things. So I think we can definitely borrow and share relentlessly. So I think in the conversation that actually Amal kind of spoke to, it's a matter of what is the lens by which we then determine that something is equitable. This isn't about an event or an activity. It's about who is making the decisions, how are those decisions being made, and then to Mr. Grant's point, then how is that explained as to why a decision got made that way. And you're right, not everybody's going to be pleased with any kind of policy or practice or decision, but you have a framework by which you then align the decision you're making or action you're taking.
In some abbreviated way, I think, Anna, I appreciate what you just said, is that we should probably think about equity as a process framework and then speak to the process and clearly indicate that how people diversity mattered in the considerations, and that is all people will feel valued and also be honored in how they add value, and that gets mapped into a process. Otherwise, this is way different than a satisfaction survey. This is not a satisfaction survey. It's not a PR thing. This is core deep work honoring diversity all the way through as a process.
So being really intentional about our work is what I'm hearing, right?
Very
There's a sense
deliberate.
of intentionality to all of the work that we're doing.
And I think in the statement so far is we have been, it looks like we're viewing it as a structural systemic thing across everything. It says all policies. So therefore that's going to keep us out of the micro, every single event that varies in terms of just general human interest. Some people are interested in birds and other ones are interested in trees. Okay, sometimes they get together, but there we go.
Mhm.
I think you still have to have some flexibility there because, excuse me, diversity is about differences. And if you want to showcase and show everybody's included, and say you have a festival that you pick a region of the world and say that we've got 5% represented in Marion of a different culture, and you want to put on a festival, if you tie this too tight, you can't do that because it is going to upset somebody. But The other thing is that how do you expose people to the differences unless you undertake an event like that, and you know you're going to offend somebody, but it's for the greater good, right? And that's what we need to think about. And I wouldn't tie this so tight that you can't get a breath of fresh air through it.
Mhm.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I mean, with events, I think you're taking that risk anyway. You're taking that risk anytime we do any event that someone's gonna like it. Like you said, someone's gonna like it and someone's not gonna like it. But as long as our doors are open and inviting every culture in, I think it's no problem. Like I said, it's for the greater good.
And someone on this panel would probably be able to say, I've done an event and I put out a precursor feeler in the community on every tree trunk and on every lamppost and sent out every flyer and said, please let us know how we can have you contribute to this event or have your, you know, have you as an individual and or as a group included, and still you upset, someone gets upset. So, I mean, at least probably that's one way of saying, listen, we went out there, we said, please contribute, please be involved, please let us know how you can be included in this situation. And if you didn't come out and say you wanted to be included, then, well, I don't know what else I can do for you, but that might be a little too blunt.
Yep, I think our job is to provide equal opportunity. But we are here today talking about equity inclusion because it was brought up that there are marginalized groups
Right.
that they don't feel included. Diversity is one thing. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Being included is being heard.
So how do you reach those people that are in the crevices and cracks that are shy and need to and have something to say? How do you get them out of there?
I think that's where it's not that we have to figure out how to get anyone out of anything. It really is, how do we have a welcoming and safe environment where people are willing to be vulnerable and risky to speak up when maybe they aren't used to speaking up. So it's an indirect way of getting involvement is really by creating a safe, welcoming environment.
Yeah, yeah.
And people are more vulnerable with those whom they can relate to. So I think it's upon us to, you know, as a group, be able to find those that relate to us in different ways. Someone may relate to me different than they relate to Maul or Colette, but if we're getting out to them and we're being able to, you know, preach what we're doing, we'll be able to get them to open up a little bit. But more than likely, they're not going to open up unless they're talking to someone that they can relate to.
So it's sort of what I'm hearing is that we have this policy, whatever it is, right? And then when we put it into practice, we make sure that it truly is providing that place for voice, right, for all those folks. So really looking at the policy and then how we roll it out into practice. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, we're going to need to be aware of our own blind spots.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's also going to be incumbent on the, excuse me, the city council to ask that question. When the policy or the event is put before them, they need to ask the question, how did we arrive at this decision? Or what was the emphasis behind this? So that and that transparency is developed that the people of the community realize that the leaders, the city council, the mayor, city manager, they're all looking to to reassure that that is a practice policy and not just lip service.
I couldn't agree more, Steve.
And I'm
Nick?
sure you guys will do the right thing.
Right, but I think what we're talking about is, yes, doing the right thing, but making sure we have checked our blind spots, right? So we are purposefully and intentionally doing the right thing, which I
Right.
appreciate.
Well, and to stay true to our core values from our first or second meeting is we better have some data and evidence that we're basing our responses to on whatever it is that we move forward on. I'll just add in, reflecting upon the last meeting, I was thinking about the police data, and I was thinking, well, great, we have some data, but how and who uses it in what ways throughout all segments of the city? And so having it and never using it, well, in our case, we're going to need some evidence and data that supports all aspects of the equity lens. And that will be challenging, but that's what transformation's about, I guess.
I'm kind of tracking things live as we talk, so that way I don't lose my notes.
Great idea, Lon. So have we sort of a little bit transitioned into practice? Do you feel like? We were talking about policy. We want to make sure we cover police operations. That's underneath policy as well. But I do feel like we've transitioned a little bit into practice with some of our conversation.
Yeah, and one kind of tends to naturally flow into the other, because once you set the policy, you want to make sure that it's getting followed and it's getting done.
Right.
So, for what we have listed in here and on the draft as the first priorities, then the next ones were the police operations, profiling, and then discussions around review board. I know there were quite a few other things related to police, but those were the ones that I had pulled out, that there was early conversations and a lot of conversation around.
If I remember from last time, Chief shared a lot of really good data, and at the same time helped us understand that there's some data we just don't have, right? So I don't know how we put that in here, but I feel like we need to find a way in order to get access to that data to help make these decisions. So I appreciated Chief when he said, here's all I've got, but also here's a bunch of stuff that we probably should have and we don't have access to at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I go back to we talked a little bit last week too about, from a priority standpoint, for me, it's wanting to kind of get out in that outreach mode and those listening posts to find out the scope of, who feels like they don't have a voice, and let's figure out what we got there first before we start crafting, policies and practices. Let's figure out what we truly have, and then we can prioritize off that. I mean, if we've got glaring examples that jump out, that would be to me. And it's like anything else. I think I said this last week. I can go out all day long and talk to the Kiwanis Club. That's an easy speech for me, and it's reaching out to people that need to get information to me, but I don't know how to get to them, and they're not comfortable coming to me. And that's kind of what I'm looking for from this group, is to try to make those connections where we can get out and talk to people.
Yeah, and the one next item on the agenda after we're done with work plan is to talk about timeline and events for those community input sessions. We've had some internal discussions and have some ideas, but it definitely would take a lot of outreach from this group. And I think, the Civil Rights Commission has been planning on doing some of that kind of work. And rather than give people, meeting fatigue, it would really be nice to build around those if they've already got them scheduled and they've been working in the background on it here for a while. And then to publicize it. I mean, talking with our communications person, we can do formats like this where we just extend direct invitations out to a bunch of people. You can do it as a community meeting. As we get more people vaccinated and get more towards summer, we'd really like to be able to do things in person as well and kind of go to the audiences around the community. But in the realm of electronic, it's just a little bit more difficult. But as I think about it, I think stories have power, and hearing the experiences that people have, that's what creates the narrative. It creates the impression they have of the community, and they talk to their friends. And all of those pieces matter, and we need to understand that. The only way we're going to do it is to actually engage and talk to folks.
When you talk about
You're muted.
Steve, you're muted.
when you're talking,
You're muted again, Steve, darn it.
You hit it.
and there we go. I'll get that mouse away from it. I've been attacking that microphone. So my comment is that when you're talking about going out in the community, are you referring to possibly having a session with this group? And the reason why I mentioned it, I've been in a couple of sessions with some individuals, and I mentioned this task force, and they have no knowledge as well as understanding about what this group is. And I'm going to go out on a limb, and I know there'll be some people that will be defensive, but it's the same with the Civil Rights Commission as well. It was when I was chairing it, but it's what's out there and the resources that the city has. And we are a resource as well, but the Civil Rights Commission has been around for a while now, and there's still people in the community that don't understand that it exists and what they can offer. And it's the same thing as this task force. So if you throw things out there, they're going to be wondering about, well, where did this come from? What did you guys do? Did some of you get into a conference room and drum up this and put it down on a piece of paper, and this is what we're going to have to deal with? I think when you have this collective body that the council and yourself, Lon, have come up with the idea of getting a task force together to understand what's going on in the community, and then you don't show them who these individuals are. And I'm not looking because I need TV time or anything. But what I'm saying is that we add credibility to what you're coming up with when they see that we're the average citizen that may be their neighbor. And that helps you guys build up more credibility and accountability, because we've had individuals who don't all work for the city who are involved in coming up with this game plan. But
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
no, I appreciate that, Steve, because that's one of the things that honestly cities struggle with. We get programmed into certain ways of doing public outreach. We publish an agenda on the website. It gets put in 3 locations on bulletin boards in the city. It gets posted on the Facebook page. But what else? I mean, how are you reaching? It's like when we did the citizen survey, there's good data in there, but you break it down and take a look at how many people of color responded to the equity survey that we did. It's not very many. So it didn't reach the populations that could have been the ones who had the experiences that might have really helped us inform it. So anything that we can do, I'm open to any avenue we've got to get more reach for these efforts and for this community and for the work that we're trying to do, because what we've done so far just doesn't work for this type of initiative.
So I agree with what Steve said. We basically need I'll call it change management outreach plan to really do a campaign to expose, or not necessarily expose, but to say who we are, what is our purpose, and really define our mission for what we're trying to accomplish. Your comments about the Civil Rights Commission, we've actually had those same discussions as a group recently about how we're not visible, people don't know who we are, and we're looking to change those perceptions within the community this year by being more active and doing more things. So I do think that we could probably take a similar approach as this equity task force and maybe do more promotion and highlight what we're trying to do.
Well, and I was going to say too, I serve on the outreach committee for the Civil Rights Commission. And so, yeah, we were just having this discussion earlier this week or late last week. I can't remember now, but and we are working on developing our calendar for the next like 15 months. And so this might be a good opportunity for us to partner, and that way we're not over duplicating or we're not duplicating and we're not working against each other. If we can work together cohesively to do some outreach, I think that that would be a great thing. So I've been taking notes. I plan on taking this back to our outreach committee to be able to say, okay, how can we, be a part of this?
Well, the first part of a change is building awareness. And that partnership between Civil Rights Commission and this group is certainly essential. But if we're going to build some awareness around diversity and inclusion, it would seem that we need to have access to the existing structure within the city and basically gather a profile of what each is doing in terms of diversity and inclusion, whether it's planning and zoning, recreation, the whole organization, and to convene a session with the representatives or however, and examine what we found out in collection of that awareness data, because awareness precedes all of it. Then we get into the desire and the knowledge and the ability and all that kind of stuff. So that would really inform our work, and it would also align with our data collection and evidence. We got to have evidence of a starting point that broadens our scope and more visibility.
Okay, so I suspect you are all smarter than I am, and I'm okay with that. Al, can you provide can you say that a little differently so I understand what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm just kind of piggybacking off change management.
Okay.
In the 5 phases.
Yep.
Change management. The first one's awareness.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is desire. The third one is knowledge. The fourth one is ability. And the last one is reinforcement. It's the old ADKAR model that Rockwell and other different places use. But, and by the way, that occurs in a sequence. Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And there would be ways for us to collect current state evidence of where we are. And that simultaneously, that's going to inform what Jennifer was mentioning of we don't need duplication of effort toward that. We need to have a coordinated, cohesive way for all the entities in the city to see how all this maps together. And out of that, perhaps could come something like a quality of life index for all people in Marion, and how everybody feels valued and how everybody can add value to the city. So it would be a project that would need to have scope to it. And but I think right now we just need shared awareness among all the different entities.
That's helpful. Thank you. So that awareness piece, right? Both internal and external is what I'm hearing,
That's
which
correct.
seems to be really important. So Steve, it was good for you to start with that comment. We all are on board. Well, I guess not all of us, but a majority, right? We're resonating with your comment.
So he's saying engage all internal departments in this conversation because they're going to be helpful. And by doing that, we create that expectation that equity is a criteria should be in all evaluations on our business when we're developing policies, and create the expectation that policies have to have a way to be evaluated and adjusted to based on the feedback. So creating that framework, this is going to take us back to the policy, creating that framework in regard to equity lens. So everybody's expecting that equity is a major criteria for evaluation. And then we are going to come back and reevaluate and measure progress and see how we're doing in terms of equity. And then engaging everybody as a partner, not just the Civil Rights Commission and the task force taking on this huge task. Everybody on the different functions are responsible to get us towards that goal of inclusion and equity.
Okay, question about awareness and this idea of a sort of a communication. How are we going to get folks to know about what we're doing so then we can engage their voice? Would it make sense to have a group of us, right, a smaller subset, kind of work on what that plan would look like and bring that back to the larger group for the next time we meet? What do you think?
Yes.
Okay.
I think also because I know through the Civil Rights Commission, it takes some learning and to understand, for those that don't work in the city, to understand what the system looks like. So, because we were as in that commission, we were, how do can we create a Facebook page so then we can start putting stuff out, and there are all of these other, there's a system already in place and rules in place that we learned about as we were trying to set something, so I think making sure we all understand what we're working with, I think first.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe, and Lon, you'll know this better too, but with this subcommittee, maybe Amber could be sort of right on the side to help answer some of those or provide direction based on what we can and cannot do from a city perspective. Would that make sense to include her on the subcommittee?
Yeah, and Amber has a real good sense of all the tools that we have available.
Okay.
She can create Facebook pages. She can get things posted on the website. She has access to our different email lists and distribution channels. So she's a pretty good resource for that. The biggest thing is just making sure that, we're using every communication channel that we have available to us, because, hers are built more around the traditional, this is how the city presents information.
Sure.
So can
go
I
ahead.
clarify? Yeah. So this is Anna, sorry. So thinking about the prior conversation in regards to overall policy, and then kind of the subset of that of like other specific police specific operations, it looks like we're putting a lot of things underneath, and it makes sense to have obviously probably what will turn into several work groups that are kind of ironing this out with the time that we have each month. But thinking more broadly, I guess, in thinking, it sounds like there's one stream of thought that says we need to look internally, and there's another stream of thought that seems to be saying we need to reach out to community. So can both of those things happen at the same time, so we're not waiting for one versus the other? So in looking internally, I think Amal had mentioned how do each of the branches within the city look at what does equity look like in our efforts. What does staffing look like? What do policies look like? Things like that inform. And then if we have that knowledge, then we can better put a collective face to why we want to engage community members that, to Mike's point, or somebody else had made a point, they may not trust the person that shows up at their door to say, tell me what you think about the city. Tell me what you think about the police. Tell me what you think about housing. So it seems like we need to have shared knowledge in that, and in inclusion of obviously the policing data and things like that. But then also a pathway that I think Fred and Jennifer were talking about is, what is that bridge that already is being built with the Civil Rights Commission that is that outward reaching effort. So it feels like there's crossover in those areas, and obviously a lot of subgroup work that will have to happen. But I'm wondering if we can't continue to make those distinctions.
Yeah, I would agree, Anna. There's an internally facing component about how the city operates as an organization, but then the other piece is how does that impact the community around us? 'Cause, you know, the two are definitely tied together. What we do as a city impacts the community as a whole, and wanting to understand what the community as a whole, the feedback that we need when we're shaping those policies, but also understanding, well, the city adopted this rule 4 years ago, and this is what happened. If they're not comfortable telling us about that and we don't know, we can't fix it. So we've got to build those bridges and those communication channels. So we've got that whole feedback loop in place, and it just becomes kind of a community expectation that nobody feels like they should be uncomfortable coming over to talk to the city, whether it's me, the city council, the police chief, but they should feel comfortable telling us whatever.
And we also thought that it would be a good idea to have the Civil Rights Commission lead those community conversations, because for one, they're far-reaching and they are in touch with those marginalized groups, at least. And also they're kind of like a neutral body. People would feel comfortable talking to this commission. So we felt we can get more responses by holding those listening sessions.
Oh, and I'm not saying it wouldn't. I'm saying that's complementary to an internal reflection as well as planning with the Civil Rights Commission. What kind of outreach and engagement and relationships do they already have that, like you said, some city staff may not? Because I think of it as we looked at some of the initial data with the policing. We need to do the same thing with every other city department to some degree to say, what does representation look like in regards to who's living in our community and how they're showing up in our housing and zoning committees, in this board, in the city council? Because if you have majority white people making decisions around policy and practices, you're going to continue to have the same outcomes or feelings from neighbors that they aren't included in that conversation. Their insights, their input, their struggle, their strengths aren't included in that conversation. So that, again, self-reflective data, qualitative and quantitative, right, that is included in that.
I've just been recording the conversation here under police operations. It may not be the right spot to have it. I can clean that up later, but I didn't want to lose anything. I wanted to capture it while people were talking.
Is there a possibility before you say anything else, can we change that from police operations to city operations and then make a subheading underneath that dealing with the police itself, so that you can capture all this stuff, and then whatever is related to the police would be specific for them, but it's more of the city operation from what I'm hearing everybody talking about. Go ahead, Al.
I guess in my mind, it's also police connected. So I guess my question, Chief, thank you for presenting last month. And then also, what is the kind of next step for the department to hire somebody that can continuously provide some of that data that'll inform the decisions?
We just sat down with Amber yesterday, and I think what we decided to do is to put that data onto the city's website under the police link, and then put a place in there for people to leave comments about what else do you want to see. We can start with the basics about use of force, traffic citations, arrest, demographics of the department, and then some of the policies. And then we're going to have a comments. What else would you like to see on here that we can put on there? We're slowly but surely figuring out how to data mine some of that stuff out of our system.
Yeah, and I think that was my question is, are you planning to replace that position to be able to provide some of that additional data?
Not the position, but the equipment. So we're looking towards a new
software.
Yeah.
The budget for next year, assuming city council approves it, includes a replacement of the police system. The big question really is, what data do we have in there that we can even pull out? Because there's things I think that people would like to have that the system just has never recorded. So we really can't, there's no way to tease it out because it's just not in there. So the new system would be better at that. We are going to have that that same type of a position for what Sunny was doing for the department, but it would be a city-focused position rather than just tied into the police department. So we want to be able to do similar things, but pull that same type of data from citywide operations.
So I have two things. One would be, Chief, I'm wondering if, were you talking about that it's going to be like a report will be posted on the city's website, or because what we had what was talked about previously was that it was going to be like a dashboard that you could like dig into, and so I didn't know if that was still on the table to do something like that, or if you're looking at posting regular reports out. And then the other thing, and so I just, so that I get both my things out of the way, the other thing is I want to be very conscious of the fact that this really stemmed, the formation of this entity really stemmed in response to issues surrounding police and community relations. And so I don't want us to see, so that if we really are listening to the community and saying, okay, we see that you're concerned, you know, we see what your concerns are, then us putting police operations under a heading, like being a subheading of something, is really then saying, okay, well, we heard you, but we put you in the corner over here. Reminded me of Dirty Dancing just now, and I'm not going to quote it, but it's, you know, I want to make sure that we are really addressing what the community was concerned about and keeping that in the forefront, while also then having it be a basis for us to be able to strengthen all of the things throughout the city. So those two things.
I don't think you can do that, what you're suggesting. And the reason for that, and the reason why I suggested putting it underneath, is that you've got to look at it as an umbrella, and that each part of it you can specialize on in saying the police operation. But overall, from the discussion I've heard so far, it's touching on the entire city operation of the city government. And in doing that, you've got to have it as an umbrella. And then you put those specific things that you want to see, like the police operation. What are you going to do about the rest of the city structure? You're just going to let that go, or are you looking at changes there? And I did hear, and is it Anna? Is that I make?
Yes.
Okay. And Anna had suggested about touching some of the other things that the city also has to deal with. The demographics in their hiring practice, in the policies that they deal with. So now you've expanded that. So I think you need to, if you say police operations and other city operations, then you're getting what you're asking for, Jennifer. But I don't think you can pull it out and still have the rest of the community, in support of what you're doing.
Well, and I think my point just being that thinking about what is the public's perception or understanding. So if somebody says, "Oh, you're part of that task force," so what are they doing about the police? You know, because that's where their frame of reference is. Then it's going to be, "Oh, well, that's under. We'll get to that eventually." You know, and then people are it's going to build another layer of distrust. And so my point is, let's make sure that it is very evident what we are doing, because we really are listening to what members of the community are saying as a concern, and not watering it down or pushing it off to the side. That's my whole point. So,
and I don't see that, but that's your opinion. But the people that I've talked to don't ask that question. Their question that they're asking is that this task force, what are you doing in general to make this inclusive? And I can say that at a point, if I talked to somebody that said that they had a son who is just going to be graduating from college, who has a disability, and he's not moving back home because the community, Marion, is not that welcoming for those who have a disability in getting around to their job and getting around to different things in the town. So there are other things that people are looking at besides just what initiated and kick this off. That as long as you're opening the door, they're looking at inclusive meaning and diversity, meaning a lot more things than just people of color. And that's what we need to be sure of, to make sure that we're inclusive and not just selective. So if they're asked the question, we are taking care of the police. They're here, front and center.
Well, and I wonder if that's not where those concentrated work groups can do some more like deep dives and really honing in on some of those key questions that have come up in community, that have come up in relation to, even Chief, I'm trying to remember if it was you were saying that even though you have record of some information, other like if somebody is stopped and a person feels harassed, but they aren't given a ticket, you may not necessarily know, oh, that happened unless a complaint comes to you that they say, I felt like, me or my children were being harassed, because there's technically no record of it, right? On your end to pull from the data to say, oh, we pulled 30% of Black people over just to say X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So
Good
thinking
point,
about that deeper dive of, so what does that, in regard to the focused conversation around policing or law enforcement responses to communities of color, specifically here in Marion, what then can that group kind of collectively learn, look at data, and then engage with community that may feel more connected to potentially the Civil Rights Commission, to have that next level of data in regards to community responsiveness. So I don't think it has to be an either or, it can be a both and in all of these discussions, that you can have a more concentrated discussion for kind of that digging a little bit deeper and coming up with recommendations or information to present back to this group as a whole, to say, okay, this is how we're going to be concentrating on this. This is how we're going to be concentrating on that. And also finding out, can those subgroups include more community members to be part of those discussions?
And Chief, can you clarify for us that, I know that you've still had some challenges with pulling the data, but does it have more like of a weekly dashboard type capability like what Jennifer was talking about? Is that what you were thinking? I mean, I know it can't update live, but rather than, like a 20-page report, would it function more as a dashboard? And then to Jennifer's point, I think that the key is just making sure that, best practice, no more than 3 clicks to get to something on a website. Make sure it's front and center and visible and easily accessible, that you don't have to spend 15 minutes trying to hunt it down.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, for now, it's going to be probably more of a report, and just depending on how often we update it, whether it's every 2 weeks, it just takes time. From sometimes with the arrest or a stop, it takes a while for the paperwork to get all the way through the system. So I want to make sure that the numbers we're given are as accurate as we can get them on that. It would be great if we could go down to, you could click on arrest and then click into a subgroup on that and see what those arrests were for. We're just not going to be able to do that right now. I don't think it's possible. And I did want to ask too, I know the focus of this started with the police department, but I've kind of pulled the curtain back on what we've got here in numbers wise and things, and assuming, did that surprise anybody about our numbers, that they were lower or higher than what you thought or anticipated? And is it something that, if it is lower, is it something, well, we still do the police, but we pivot off onto the other parts of the city?
I think at this point, we heard the concern. We pulled the data that we have, and the approach we're taking to address the concern is a structural one. We realize the limitations we have in the system, and that concern made the project of updating the system or investing in an overhaul to the system is the highest priority we have in this budget. So we're moving forward to build. We cannot go back. There is nothing we can do in regard to the past. We've seen the data, we learned about it, but we felt it's limited. We can't really interpret, right? Because it doesn't collect all the information. It doesn't reflect the full picture So what we do right away, we got into the business of looking for software. We are right now looking at demos, trying to, with the sole goal of, we are going to collect better data for equity and reporting needs. This is going to take a while. The system itself is a huge investment. We're putting in a budget 600,000 to invest in this system. Implementation is going to take a whole year. But right now, we don't want to stop what we're doing to go and dig in the data that is going to tell us, and it's not going to change the perception. So what we do, we look at the overall policies, and Chief is actively taking actions. He already got in touch with the foundation too, and he had a contract regarding the mental health liaison, and he worked on the policy itself. And he updated his use of force policy, and he set the new expectation with his personnel. He's working on it incrementally. We don't want to fixate on the data and putting the dashboard is going to tell us the same story. We do have the data. We have the ability to pull reports on a monthly basis and update them or post them on the website. But we can really work on a dashboard that is live because we know the limitations and we don't have the resources to do it right now. So we are going to invest everything we can to build the system with the new expectation. And from now on, we are cognizant with the needs, community needs, and we are making reports, we're making them a priority for us.
So if we can just pause for 3 seconds. Thank you, Amal. That was really helpful. I'm looking at the clock and it's 6:03, and I started the meeting saying I'm going to do my best to keep us within that hour. I've already failed at that, but that's okay, right? So I think maybe I just want to make sure that I get a sense about where we are and where we need to go next. I feel like we have affirmed that what is listed here as our first priorities is accurate. This idea of a framework and that city operations to include police operations and make sure that that is one of the first, or maybe the one that we begin with when we're looking at using this framework to address policy decisions. We also started to talk about this idea of awareness, and that maybe we need to bring a group together to help us figure out how we actually put that into practice, right? So how will we make folks aware, both internal and external, of this work? So then we can get some good additional voices as a part of this work, right? Because I think what I'm hearing is we're all participating, but we've got a whole lot of voices out there that aren't, and either they aren't because they don't feel like we want to hear their voices, or they just don't know that we exist and we're doing this hard work. So I guess what I'm asking you is, do we feel like we're good with this first set of priorities? And second question I have for you is, do you feel like we're at a place where we could bring some folks together to start doing some work behind the scenes to inform what we're going to do next?
Well, I would say we need to get a work team going behind the scenes to bring just a little more coherence to this. And tonight, what I'm observing is I think we have one overarching goal, and that is to establish a comprehensive framework to look at all policy and practice decisions through an equity lens. And that sits overarching these. And what we talked about is we were going to give a comprehensive look at all city operations internally, and then a subgroup can get out and start thinking about the external input and get that listed. And to situate it properly and truthfully, we've identified the police department as a prototype to look at ourselves from a policy and practice point of view. because they happen to be in the midst of doing these things, and it's the way they're doing it that we know is very important at this point in time. But their work could inform policy, practices, and data work across the city. So I think we can honor both. But I think there is a time now for a subcommittee to kind of get together. And when you look at this, I think here's where it sets you off as first priorities and second priorities being listed here starts, this is more important than that. I think that's getting in the way a little bit here because policy and practice and data and all of it, it all turns into a welcoming city. And how do we know and what are we doing and how are we going to measure it? That's all one thing. And I think we got it listed here to where it's kind of looks like a pecking order a little bit.
Yeah, it's just the sequence, I think.
That's all it is. It's just we can turn this into a project management thing rather quickly.
Yeah, all I was really intending to do there was just sequence. Maul's correct.
Yep.
Not that one was more or less important, just practices without policies are hard to implement.
It sure is. A lot of paper.
Is there a possibility that, I noticed the city of Cedar Rapids is on the brink of passing an ordinance for a review board. Is it possible to get someone from there to give a short song and dance on the under the police operations that says a review board? Just so that we're not having, when we finally get to that discussion, that we have at least some background, you know, so we're not reinventing the wheel.
Seems like we can do that when we are ready. It makes a lot of sense. Probably a good idea too, as we think about listening posts, right? And having conversations with folks to be able to talk about that. So makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Yeah, we could run in two lanes here. One would be that police lane. And then the other lane that we heard this evening is the Civil Rights Commission seems like, I didn't pick it all up, but are looking forward to some outreach kinds of contact and want to involve us in some way or another to find out, do an internal review of what is actually going on. That's a nice, important lane for us to be doing this comprehensive work. So I was going to ask is, are they already started or are they operating with the deadline of launching something to take a look at things, the Civil Rights Commission?
I think I can answer your question. So we have done outreach throughout our time in as a Civil Rights Commission, and but what we were looking at moving forward for this year is, especially because things are just so different. Last year, everything got canceled and everything because of COVID. So some of our traditional outreach efforts couldn't happen, and so now we are working on creating a calendar of and a plan for new and different outreach opportunities that have changed with the times.
Well,
Jennifer, would it make sense to, for this subcommittee or this subgroup that's going to do that work on our side of the house to have you be a part of that, right? To help sort of crosswalk between the civil rights group and the work that we're doing. I know that you're really busy and you have a million
I was going to say,
things.
did you just volunteer me for?
I'm asking.
I planned on it anyway. I planned on asking anyway.
Okay, great.
Subcommittee.
It feels like your direction and your knowledge of what's going on with the other group, with civil rights group, would be really helpful.
Yep.
So do we maybe have a couple of other folks that would want to join Jennifer to start this kind of work behind the scenes?
Is this in regards to community engagement, or is it in regards to, can you clarify? Sorry.
Yep, that's a great question. So I think it's a little bit of a combination of a community engagement, but that awareness piece too, right? So making sure our community is aware of what we are doing at this point. Am I right, Jennifer? That's what you all are doing on your side?
That is correct.
Yep. Does that help, Anna? Or Anna, I'm sorry.
So what we are doing as an equity task force of what the Civil Rights Commission is doing, or the why of what we, kind of like the overall why do we exist? Not existentially, I mean, as an equity task force.
I think that's a great question. I get a sense it's the latter, but maybe that's part of that work too, right? Of the group determining what exactly is it that we want to make sure we are putting together as a communication plan, right? What are we making sure folks are aware of?
Yeah, and I think the one thing we wanted to make sure is that there just was not duplication of effort. I mean, we talk a lot about things like survey fatigue and, you know, email fatigue, that you just overwhelm people. And it seemed like having the Civil Rights Commission has been around for a while, and so they're looking to become more active and assume more of a central role in this. It seemed natural to have the two groups working on a complementary effort rather than each one kind of doing their own thing, and people wondering, well, what's the difference between the Equity Task Force and the Civil Rights Commission? And this group is an ad hoc task force that was created by motion of the council, where the Civil Rights Commission is statutory. I mean, they're created by ordinance. They have powers and authority, and they have a budget. And, you know, for them, I mean, they will always be around. This one, we could be done and hand everything off to them in a couple of years and let them carry the work forward. But we don't have that kind of statutory permanence that the Civil Rights Commission does.
So the objective of the communication component that Jennifer will be a part of will be more about understanding the context in which this task force came together, because people of color and other community members like the Marion Alliance and other entities came together and said, hey, we need to look at this, assess it, and we then have that communication of why we exist to engage more community members that don't feel like they've been heard or didn't respond to the community survey or haven't been coming to listening posts. Is that the intent?
I think you articulated it perfectly from my perspective. I'm not sure about others.
Well, and I was going to say, you know, I really see it. I'm really focusing on the outreach component of it. So, looking at like the community input sessions and all of those sorts of things. So it's really like looking at, yes, Anna, everything you said, but then also moving forward of like, then how do we, and like what Lon was saying, how do we carry this forward in a way that's sustainable? And so,
Yeah, we're, you know, one of my goals is to make sure that we are building bridges to communities that we have not had bridges to in the past. And I want those to be permanent, that it should just become part of how we operate, part of how the community operates, that, you know, anybody who feels like they might not have had a voice in the community has the opportunity to have that voice in the city, and that's just becomes part of how we do business.
So I guess my clarifier is, because I am stepping in for Janessa, what is the kind of guideline that you're providing for this subgroup work? If there's one or two that are meeting in between, is that all members, including proxy members, or is it the core group?
I think so Lon will tell me if I'm wrong. My sense is it can be either, but we'll want to make sure it's consistent, right? Because the folks will need to, in order to move the work forward, I think it needs to be the same person, right? To be consistent. Does that answer your question, Anna and Lon? Am I okay to say that?
Yeah, I mean, that was our goal. I mean, no issues with proxies, just we want to ensure continuity. So.
Right. So we've got Jennifer, who happily volunteered. Jennifer, I'm happy to be a part of that work too, so you can include me. If we could get one more person, I think it'd be great to have 3 of us, and we can get started on that work. So think about that for a moment. And then I wonder if for the next meeting, we could have Lon, you bring back to us some frameworks, right? Or some additional information on frameworks, and we can have a discussion about what the framework will look like for us. And then a definition, a more clear definition of equity. So all of us to send to Lon, if there's something we want to make sure is included in that definition of equity, let's get that to him before the next meeting as well. So what I see is 3 next things to do is the group get together, the subgroup about communications. Lon is working on frameworks to bring back to us, and we are sending our thoughts and ideas about equity so we can firm up what equity means as part of our work. Did I miss anything, or is there something else that we should include at this point?
No, you just took care of agenda item 4.
Okay. We still need another, at least one more volunteer to help Jennifer and I. Anna, you had unmuted. I'm sorry, and I started to speak right over you.
No, I just wondered if the communication subgroup would be the only one, or will there be another one specific to the city or the city and policing component of it?
I think at some point, and maybe that we work on that the next time we come together, unless you all feel like we can get started on that at this point. I'm not sure we can, but if you think we can, let's bring a group together and get started on that work.
Yeah, I guess for that, I would just ask people that are interested in being on that, send me a note and we'll start to do it, convene it between this meeting and the next committee of the whole.
Well, and Anna, please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm sensing is that maybe it's like there's this concern of, well, if I sign up for this, will I be able to do this later type of thing. And so I think because this is a new task force and we don't know what those subcommittees are going to be, like, I would just ask that if anybody is interested in helping build that initial framework so then we can carry things forward, like, please join, but you're not signing on for the whole time, like it's not oh, you have to choose this or this. It's more of like, if this is an area of interest, please, I think if we can get together between now and the next meeting, then we would be able to come back with like, here's kind of where we're at and go from there and see what the subcommittee needs, what a subcommittee would need for a long-term.
I'll help out.
Look, you recruited another one, Jennifer. That was a good one.
Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome.
Well, and since Fred spoke up, I might be willing to also help, but just kidding, Jennifer, I joined because of you too. But I think to my point, to clarify, depending on where the subgroup activities happen, because we have 2 Marion Alliance members and 2 ad hoc members, we want to make sure that we're plugging in to each of the subgroups so it doesn't feel like we're putting energy in one place or another. And if not necessarily that all 4 would join one or the other, but that there's an opportunity for other members to join in the conversations that are centered around key components around the policing work group.
Great. Okay, I think we have our marching orders for the next time we get together, right, Lon?
Yeah, the only other question, I saw that Cersei had been posting in the Q&A, and I think some of them got answered. I just wanted to make sure, did everybody see those?
Yes.
Since I'm screen sharing, I'm not 100% sure what you can and can't do as far as viewing Q&A or discussion or anything. So I've not been in control of the meeting before.
So it looks like she was talking about data, right? Just making
Yep.
sure that we look at national data, and if we want to have a small group come together and present on some of that national data.
Okay.
Okay.
And she just posted she'd like to be on the policing subgroup, so that would be great.
I think she also put you and Chief Kitzmiller on that subgroup. So I like that.
I get voluntold for things a lot.
I was just thinking, I feel like that's a voluntold, right, Lon?
Yep.
Oh, shoot. Okay. All right. Is there anything else before you all go on with your evening and hopefully have some warm dinner?
All right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Have a good night. And we'll get busy and working on what we need to do for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.